Howdy, Professor Williams. My name is Jackson Weethorn, and this is my submission for the Sports and Psychology assignment. So I actually have started seeing a therapist over the past few weeks, and it's been tremendously helpful in my life, just being able to kind of open up and talk a little bit about how I feel and my perspective on different things, and just being able to have that open dialogue with another person and do it with someone who can kind of help change my perspective and change the way that I see certain things or feel about certain things. And I've seen tremendous benefit in my life, and it was really awesome to do some research on some of my favorite athletes and get to see that they also had similar sentiments when it came to seeing a psychologist. With that being said, I wanted to first talk about Tom Brady, the greatest quarterback of all time. I was actually listening to a podcast a few weeks ago, and I didn't really think about this that much. It wasn't really a huge talking point in this podcast, but Tom Brady had mentioned that he had been seeing a sports psychologist when he was at Michigan, and that this psychologist actually had a huge impact on him becoming who he is, becoming the greatest quarterback ever. Some of the things that he talked about, some of the things that he mentioned in this podcast, while it was just a short stint, he talked about the fact that he oftentimes would compare himself to other players, other teammates, focusing on what opportunities they were being given and what opportunities he was not being given. And he said that the psychologist kind of helped him work through that and helped him to focus less on other people and other teammates, but to focus more on himself and focus on how he can get better and earn the opportunities that he was looking for. He said that they also just really helped him in mental fortitude and becoming just kind of a psychopath is what he called himself. I think mostly he just was talking about some of that competitive nature and really honing in and digging into that and becoming a competitor at the highest level. The next athlete that I wanted to talk about was actually Kevin Love. Kevin Love is another guy who has opened up a lot about his own mental health and about his journey in seeing psychologists and just being able to kind of talk about what he's been going through. It's something that I think there's kind of a stigma that surrounds seeing psychologists, seeing a therapist, being able to talk about your feelings. A lot of times there's kind of a stigma around that. At least for guys, I've kind of felt that way throughout my life, and it seems as though these athletes have felt that way too. Kevin Love opened up about having his very first panic attack, and how that impacted him and how that made him see life and just the anxiety and the depression that surrounded him during that time as well, and really just kind of opened up and is raw about his emotions and his feelings and some of the things that he was going through, and he just talked about how opening up and talking about those things, being able to talk with someone who's trained for this, someone who knows about these things like panic attacks and anxiety and depression, someone who's an expert in these fields, has been tremendously helpful for his own mental health and his own basketball career, the way that he got to manage and walk through his career going forward after seeing a psychologist, and how his career actually got a little bit better after that, right? Now, I've talked about two athletes that have just highly praised psychologists, and I think that's kind of the resounding sentiment when I looked online. A lot of athletes had high praise. You also did tell us to look for the cons and talk about some of the negatives of seeing a sports psychologist. And there's really two things I wanted to mention. One, this is just kind of an overarching sentiment that a lot of athletes felt like there was some sort of stigma about seeing a psychologist. It seemed to be the sentiment around the league that if you saw a therapist, you saw a psychologist, that you're soft, that you're weak. And a lot of athletes have expressed this feeling and expressed that this is the way that they felt. And I think that's a pretty negative connotation surrounding sports psychology. Now, with that being said, that's not necessarily a con to seeing a psychologist. Is that, I mean, maybe other people think you're weak, but I mean, so what, you know? Ultimately, I did think it was interesting. I found one other athlete named Daniel Whiffen. This guy is a Paris gold medalist in the Paris Olympics. He is a swimmer, and when asked about seeing a sports psychologist, he actually said that he doesn't like sports psychologists. And the reason for that is that the psychologist, they called him delusional, and they would talk to him. He would go into these swim meets saying things like, "I'm guaranteed to win. I'm going to win. This is what I'm going to do after I win. And the psychologist would ask him questions like, hey, what happens if you lose? Are you prepared for that? You want to talk about that. And he said this actually became a negative thing for him in seeing sports psychologists, because he said it actually benefited him to be kind of delusional, that this delusion actually helped to motivate him and helped him win these races, these swim races, at the swim competitions, because he was so delusional that he knew he was going to win, that even the thought, even talking about potentially losing, kind of messed up his mentality going into these competitions. And this is something I've noticed throughout all sports, is that a lot of these high performing athletes have a level of delusion. A lot of these athletes, they say things like, I am the greatest, or I am the best, or I'm going to win this. It's guaranteed. And I think we as normal people, as not high performing, highly paid athletes, we don't necessarily see that to be true, because we have an objective point of view. But a lot of these athletes lean into that delusion, and it does help them. It does help them perform, and it does help them in their confidence level. And so that's a negative that I did see, especially specifically from Daniel Whiffen, that it was a negative that seeing a psychologist actually kind of brought down his confidence in these meets. And so anyway, I thought that those athletes were kind of a good example of seeing a psychologist, the pros and the cons. Like I said, lots of overwhelming pros for psychologists, not a lot of negatives, but there definitely were a couple. And so anyway, that's kind of it for this video. If you need anything else, please let me know. Other than that, have a great night. Thank you so much.